The dull ache at the back of my skull, a mix of boredom and too much cheap wine on Wednesday nights, had become my constant companion. I rubbed my temples, staring at my reflection. The dress, a daring red thing I wouldn't have touched a year ago, mocked me with its vibrancy. Was this really me, the woman who used to laugh until she cried with old college friends, who'd hop a plane to Vegas with barely a suitcase? Jess, you going out? Jim's voice drifted in, muffled by the bathroom door. Typical. He was on the couch, I bet, eyes glued to some sports recap or other. Didn't even bother to look up. Yeah, sis needs me to babysit. I called back, forcing a light tone. He mumbled something in response, likely a grunt or a noncommittal. Okay. That was our thrilling Friday night exchange. Pathetic. I walked out, pasting on a smile despite the wave of, not sadness, exactly, more like a hollow resignation that had begun creeping over me. Jim was a good guy. Reliable, safe, but lately, that safety felt stifling, like a blanket on a sweltering summer day. I craved a spark, a jolt, anything to feel truly alive again. The party thrummed with an energy that set my heart racing the moment I stepped through the door. This was nothing like the barbecues and dinner parties Jim and I usually endured. No, this was different. A whirl of impossibly stylish strangers, their laughter like fine champagne against the soft murmur of expensive music. For the first time in ages, a shiver of something that wasn't dread rippled through me. You must be Jessica, a voice purred, and I turned to find a man with startling blue eyes offering me a glass of bubbly. I'm Andrew, welcome. Andrew? I let a hint of surprise into my voice. I didn't realize this was your thing. Honestly, I couldn't even place the guy. Jim must have met him through work. He grinned, and oh boy, that grin did things to my insides that no sensible wife should feel. Oh, it's definitely not. But sometimes, he leaned closer, the scent of his cologne heady and intoxicating. A man needs to spice things up a bit. It was like he flipped a switch deep inside me, a switch I hadn't even realized was getting rusty. A reckless, thrilling energy surged through me. I met his gaze, lifting my chin in a defiance that felt both alien and exhilarating. Maybe it was time I spiced things up, too. The second drink, or was it the third, slid down my throat like liquid courage. Andrew kept me laughing, his stories a whirlwind of travel and daring exploits, the total opposite of Jim's meticulously planned weekends. I felt a giddy rush of excitement that was downright dangerous. So, tell me, Jessica, his voice lowered, and the heat in his eyes sent a delicious shiver down my spine. What does a beautiful woman like you do for real fun? The old me, the predictable me, would have sputtered about family and hobbies. But some switch had flipped, and a recklessness I hadn't felt since college flared within me. Honestly, I can't quite remember, I confessed with a laugh that sounded a bit too flirtatious, even to my own ears. That's when I noticed the other man, watching intently from across the room. His wasn't Andrew's easy charm, but a raw intensity that made my skin prickle. A slow smile spread across his face, and something in the tilt of his lips, the flicker in his eyes, promised trouble. A different kind of trouble than Andrew's playful banter. Well, Jessica, the newcomer interrupted, his voice a smoky drawl that sent another, stranger shiver through me. Perhaps I could help refresh your memory. His name was Marcus, and within an hour, I was dizzy and drunk not just on champagne, but on the intoxicating attention, the raw boldness, the feeling of being vibrantly, recklessly alive. It was like a forgotten part of myself was awakening, something buried under years of routine and predictability, and I wasn't exactly sure if that was good or very, very bad. The rest of the night is a blur of stolen moments. A brush against my arm in the crowded hallway, a whispered, scandalous proposition in the dimly lit garden, and a complete, dizzying surrender to desire in a guest room I hoped none of Jim's colleagues would ever see. The old Jessica, the cautious and safe Jessica, would have been absolutely horrified. But this new, reckless Jessica, she was thrilled. And maybe a little bit terrified, too. Because underneath the thrill, a tiny voice whispered about consequences, about lines crossed. Yet, for the first time in ages, that voice felt distant and weak, easily drowned out by the pounding of my pulse and the heady rush of feeling something truly alive, even if it was tinged with danger. My head throbbed like a drumbeat, and the luxurious sheets felt like sandpaper against my skin. Guilt gnawed at me as I blinked at the unfamiliar ceiling. I'd never done anything like this. Not ever. A sharp stab of regret twisted in my gut, but then, an odd flicker of defiance rose up to meet it. Because beneath the shame, there was also a strange, heady thrill. Getting home was like stepping into a warped reality. Jim was sprawled on the couch, snoring softly, an untouched bowl of cereal beside him. The normalcy of it all, the predictability, was almost suffocating after the exhilaration of the night before. I felt a flare of anger at him, at his absolute cluelessness. "Hey, how was Lisa?" he muttered the next morning, his voice thick with sleep as he gulped down coffee. It took every ounce of strength not to fling the mug across the kitchen. "Fine. Kids are a riot. Kinda wish we..." I trailed off, unable to finish the sentence about starting a family when I'd so profoundly betrayed the one I had. The first message arrived a week later. Just a text. No name. "I saw you. That dress looked better on the floor." My blood ran cold. Panic fluttered in my chest, yet mixed with a sick jolt of fascination. Who knew? Could it be Andrew, Marcus? A twisted part of me hoped it was one of them, that it was just a game born from the night's heated abandon. But the messages kept coming. Darker, more detailed. Things only someone who was there could have seen. I started to suspect someone closer. Not Jim. He was too oblivious, but a colleague, maybe? I felt fear snake around my heart, but under that fear, a thrill twisted too. It was sick, wrong, but I couldn't deny the rush that came with having a secret this explosive. I tried to ignore it, pretend my life was normal. But normalcy, it turned out, had lost its flavor. Everything seemed dull in comparison. Jim's jokes fell flat, our dinners were bland, and even my reflection in the mirror seemed muted. The wife staring back looked tired, yes, but also touched by a spark I couldn't fully extinguish, a recklessness I didn't want to let go of. My days became a blur of paranoia and a strange, unsettling exhilaration. With each new text, every cryptic phrase dripping with accusation, I'd cycle through my suspects. Andrew's smooth charm seemed to mask a cruel edge now. Was this his twisted sense of humor? Marcus. Well, Marcus always had a streak of darkness, a dangerous gleam in his eye that perhaps wasn't just for show. Suspicion was a disease. I saw it in how Andrew and Marcus eyed each other across crowded rooms, tension sizzling between them where camaraderie had once been. It started with subtle jabs, snide comments disguised as jokes, then escalating into tense, hushed confrontations that sent a thrill of wicked pleasure through me. After all, I was the catalyst for their descent into distrust. It was ugly, yes, but I couldn't stop myself. Playing them against each other became a twisted game I couldn't resist. I'd whisper to Marcus about Andrew's smug grin, a sly hint that maybe he was the one delighting in my torment. Then, I'd drop subtle barbs around Andrew about Marcus's obsession, a carelessly tossed match to ignite his short temper. Their unraveling satisfied something dark within me, but it wasn't enough. It spurred me on, twisting the knife further. "You don't seem happy lately," I prodded Jim one evening, a feigned note of concern in my voice. It was a line I'd practiced, the bait laid carefully. His response was textbook, predictable, even. "Tired. Work's been crazy," he mumbled, barely looking up from his phone. He always fell for it. So easily manipulated with just the right hint of dissatisfaction. I pushed further, a gentle hand on his arm, a worried frown marring my brow. "Is it just work, though? I feel like maybe you need more." His insecurity, a tender spot I knew well, flared to life. Over the next weeks, his questions turned sharper, his attention more suffocating. It was perfect. His rising possessiveness became a weapon I wielded with chilling delight. I became the victim in his eyes, his fear making him the perfect pawn in my twisted game. He was the final piece of my puzzle. With everything spiraling the way I'd orchestrated, I felt an intoxicating sense of power. I wasn't just a pawn anymore, I was the queen, and my chess pieces were dancing exactly how I commanded. The final confrontation didn't happen in a dark alleyway or shadowy parking lot like in those bad crime shows Jim liked. It was at a charity event of all places, the kind of glitzy affair where everyone wore pasted-on smiles and designer dresses. Marcus cornered me by the dessert table, his eyes no longer smoldering with a playful heat, but blazing with a fury that made me take a step back. "We need to talk," he hissed, his voice barely a whisper but laced with enough venom to cut glass. Away from prying eyes, on a deserted balcony, he laid it all bare. He wasn't just a suspect, he was the blackmailer. The messages, the threats. A twisted desire for revenge fueled by my cruel game playing. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I'd underestimated him, mistook his dark intensity for something I could control. How wrong I'd been. "It was never about money," he snarled, a cruel twist to his lips. "You think you can play with people, break them for your sick amusement? I'm going to break you, make you pay for every damn thing you've done." His threats weren't just about tearing my relationship with Jim apart, he wanted total destruction. Leaking the truth to my friends, my judgmental sister, posting proof all over the internet where it would never fade away. He'd make me a pariah, a cautionary tale of a reckless housewife getting her comeuppance. Panic flared hotter than the shame. For all my manipulative bravado, I was facing a force I hadn't accounted for, an obsession I'd helped create. And that's when it hit me. Desperation, yes, but with a flash of the old recklessness bubbling within. Marcus had cornered me, but perhaps I could corner him back. The plan came together with terrifying clarity. It was twisted, dangerous, the kind of thing the old, cautious me would have abhorred. But that part of me was long gone. You want to play rough? Let's play. The words tasted bitter on my tongue, but there was a steely determination behind them. I lured him back to my place. A flimsy excuse about needing to talk, a promise of resolution. He fell for it, arrogance blinding him to the fact that the prey might now be the predator. Inside, it was a scene I'd meticulously staged. A few misplaced items, a hint of a struggle, and my word against his. It was risky as hell, but with my whole world crumbling, the gamble felt darkly thrilling. What happened next is a blur of adrenaline and terror. His accusations turned into shouting, shoving. And then, the moment I orchestrated, the slip, the misplaced object, the desperate act that ended it all. In the aftermath, it was me calling the police, me playing the distraught victim, me weaving a tale of an obsessed lover gone too far. And the beautiful thing, the truly terrible thing, is that it was believable. Cleaning up was mechanical. Shock had numbed me, replaced by a chilling practicality. Every trace of the struggle, every item out of place meticulously put back, the scene sanitized of truth. My acting skills, honed during my treacherous game, kicked in on autopilot. I summoned the tears, the trembling breaths, the carefully worded account of terror and self-defense for the police. In the days that followed, there was an onslaught of sympathy, the concerned whispers of friends, the pitying stares from neighbors. Jim, once a dull background figure, became hyper-focused, his concern twisting into a possessive, almost suffocating protectiveness. He monitored my every move as if waiting for me to crumble, for the facade of the distraught wife to crack. The attention, the careful watching eyes, should have been terrifying. It was proof of how easily my lies could unravel. Instead, it felt like a perverse kind of victory. I was trapped, yes, but I'd constructed the cage myself. News of Marcus's death rippled through the tight-knit circles we traveled in. Whispers of tragic accident did little to hide the undercurrent of suspicion, the lingering questions. Andrew disappeared entirely, either racked with guilt over failing to see his friend's dark turn or simply terrified of being implicated in my web of lies and betrayal. Either way, my pawns had vanished from the board, leaving me isolated on my ill-gotten throne. I thought I'd crave freedom, the thrill of escape. Instead, my victory felt empty. The constant looking over my shoulder, the jolt of fear at every unexpected knock, the guilt that gnawed at me in quiet moments. This was my prize. The thrill of the game had curdled into constant dread. I'd won, but at a devastating cost. Sleep became the ultimate torment. No amount of wine could blur the faces that haunted me. Jim's, etched with a fearful vigilance that chilled me far more than his complacency ever had. Marcus's, twisted in a mask of fury. And perhaps worst of all, Andrew's, a silent accusation of betrayal cutting far deeper than any open hostility. The police closed the case, a clear-cut act of self-defense against an unstable man. The world saw a grieving woman who had narrowly escaped tragedy. What they didn't see was a prisoner of my own making, haunted by the ghosts of choices I couldn't take back, and the constant, sickening fear that one day, the truth would come clawing its way out. The first few months after Marcus were a bizarre, claustrophobic mix of relief and suffocating terror. Jim, bless his naive heart, bought my performance hook, line, and sinker. His worry transformed him from a lazy, indifferent husband to a vigilant watchdog, determined to shield his fragile wife from further harm. At first, the constant attention was an odd comfort. It meant no one suspected the truth, that I, the reckless adulteress and cold-blooded manipulator, had escaped unscathed. But as weeks stretched into months, Jim's concern twisted into something darker, an obsession disguised as affection. He had to know where I was at all times, checking my phone location obsessively. The questions came too. Innocent at first, about how I was feeling, what I was doing to get over it. Slowly, they grew sharper, probing at my every word for signs of a breakdown he seemed both to dread and anticipate. The guilt was a constant companion, a low thrum of unease that sharpened into terror at the slightest provocation. Each passing police car set my pulse racing, every unexpected knock on the door made me jump. I swore I saw Marcus everywhere, in the flicker of shadows, in the faces of strangers' accusing eyes burning into my soul. Jim called it concern, protectiveness, but it felt more like a velvet-lined cage. He insisted on driving me to appointments, walking me to the mailbox like I was a skittish child, not a grown woman. His attempts at chivalry morphed into a suffocating control. The irony was nauseating. I'd craved excitement, a break from the predictability of my life. Now, I was a prisoner of my own deceit, trapped in a marriage that had become twisted and unfamiliar. My carefully constructed lies had transformed my own home into a cell. Escape became an obsession, twisting in my mind every waking hour. But every plan crumbled under scrutiny. Running away meant losing everything: the house, the financial security. Jim would undoubtedly spin a sympathetic tale of his wife crumbling under the weight of tragedy, painting me as a victim, unstable and dangerous. The truth could never be known, not without destroying the life I'd spent years building. And yet, staying was unbearable. Jim's overbearing protectiveness made my skin crawl. The weight of my secret, the constant fear of discovery, it felt like it would crush me. I was stuck in a horrifying limbo, desperate for freedom but terrified of the cost. Just when I thought I couldn't sink any lower, a ghost from my past crawled out of the woodwork. It was Claire, an old college friend I hadn't spoken to in years. She'd heard the news about Marcus somehow, and her sympathy call sent a spike of pure terror through me. Claire had no idea about the party, my betrayal, but she knew me. She remembered the wild streak, the reckless glint in my eyes that had been buried under suburban boredom. I nearly hung up on her. But then, a desperate, twisted kind of relief washed over me. Here was someone who wasn't completely fooled by my grieving widow act, someone who saw a flicker of the old me, the dangerous me. We met for coffee, a pathetic attempt at normalcy in the bright, bustling cafe. And bit by bit, I let the mask slip. Not the full truth, of course, but hints. The restlessness before the party, the dissatisfaction with Jim, that feeling of being trapped in a life I never truly chose for myself. Claire didn't judge, at least not outwardly. Instead, she listened, and a strange, twisted connection formed between us. Shared secrets have a way of doing that, even when they're only half-truths. She, unlike everyone else, didn't see me as a victim, but as a woman capable of darkness. And perversely, it was liberating. It was in those clandestine meetings, whispered conversations over bitter coffee, that a desperate plan started to take hold. Claire, with her quiet intensity and her knack for reading people, became my co-conspirator. We tapped into Jim's paranoia, his fear that I wasn't as broken as he believed. A misplaced item he was sure I wouldn't own, a text message with no name appearing and disappearing on my phone. Tiny seeds meant to make his insecurity bloom into something monstrous. Then, the clincher. Evidence slipped into his briefcase that suggested a hidden connection between him and Marcus. An old photo, a carefully forged note, just ambiguous enough to make his suspicious mind run wild. He'd already begun to doubt everyone around me. Maybe now, he'd doubt himself. It was a dangerous game, a house of cards that could come crashing down at any moment. But the alternative, my slow suffocation, was far more terrifying. The tension in our house ratcheted up with each passing day. Jim's questions became accusations, his concern morphed into suspicion. Every time he looked at me, I saw a darkness in his eyes, a reflection of my own twisted actions. It was exhilarating and sickening at the same time. I was playing with fire, and the inevitable explosion was coming. It all went down one rainy Tuesday night. Jim had been needling me for days, the faked evidence gnawing away at him. His usual blandness gave way to bursts of rage followed by sullen silences. I was walking on eggshells. But that night, his suspicion targeted Andrew of all people. A wrong glance at a fundraiser, apparently, was enough to reignite the festering paranoia I'd cultivated. He stormed off, the accusation ringing in my ears. I'm going to sort this out once and for all. The downpour, his drunken determination. It was the perfect storm I'd been waiting for. I knew, with a predator's certainty, that he was heading straight for Andrew's apartment. What followed was a blur of panic and calculated relief. Sitting on my couch, the rain pounding on the window, my pulse throbbed in my ears. Had I gone too far? The image of Jim, red-faced and wild, confronting an equally unstable Andrew filled me with dread. Yet, a wicked part of me relished the chaos I'd unleashed. The call came late that night. Not from Jim, but from the police. It was as I expected, but also so much worse. A brutal fight. A body. Maybe two. The details were sickening, and beneath the shock, I felt a chilling satisfaction. The mess was out of my hands now, a consequence of a game I'd set in motion but hadn't needed to finish myself. In the aftermath, I was a machine. My performance was Oscar-worthy. The tears of the devastated wife, the confusion, the trembling hands clutching a sympathetic detective's card. Jim's simmering paranoia, his erratic behavior before the disappearance, it became a convenient narrative, painting him as unstable, consumed by jealousy, responsible for his own demise. The investigation dragged on, but no suspicion fell on me. I was clever, they'd say, and brave. I'd endured so much. Yet, amidst the whispers of pity and the inheritance that made me nauseously wealthy, true freedom remained out of reach. Sleep became a torture chamber, filled with faces. Jim's, contorted in rage, then blank and lifeless. Marcus's, a chilling mask of accusation before everything went dark. And Andrew's, with its flash of hurt and betrayal, perhaps the worst of all. I hardly recognized the woman I'd become. The wild spark I yearned to recapture was dead, replaced by a coldness that seeped into my bones. The wealth, the house, the illusion of freedom I'd so desperately craved, it tasted like ashes. Winning had come at a terrible cost. I was, in a cruel twist, both liberated from constraint and trapped in a prison of my own design. The thrill of the game had faded, leaving not a triumphant victor, but a haunted woman, forever shackled to a devastating choice. Alone in my echoing, lavish home, I was nothing more than a ghost, a chilling reminder that vengeance is a dish best left